welcome to the Sugar and Spikes podcast, a podcast for entrepreneurs, side hustlers, and anyone ready to uplevel their career in their own damn way. I'm Des. I'm a life coach for women who get that having it all sometimes means having to balance the good and the bad, the sugar and the spikes, and all the in-between.
And I'm Tammy. I'm a compassionate yet BS-free therapist, and I work with clients to help them build skills to lead kick-ass lives.
Between the two of us, we have 4 master's degrees and thousands of hours helping people develop balance, confidence, and clarity on their terms. So let's get started. Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Sugar and Spikes podcast. I'm Des.
I'm Tammy.
And we're just getting right into it.
Let's do this thing. Yeah, because I thought this week would be a good time to talk about, when life just kicks you in the fucking face.
Yeah, and I feel like we talk about this all the time, but there's also, it's worth repeating. Okay. There's this whole idea of, your vibe attracts whatever happens to you, and that's shit. Sometimes, I just did a post about this a while ago, I'm kind of on board with the whole, your vibe attracts your tribe type of thing.
Sure.
But,
like attracts like.
Yeah, but your vibe does not attract the fucking Category 5 hurricane that's headed right your way.
Yeah, it's not your fault.
Yeah, life happens.
It definitely happens.
And, living in this world of, sunshine ponies, rainbows, and unicorns is one thing, and then not being skilled to manage when life happens is kind of shit.
Yeah.
I think we've all been there.
I mean, you have to know how to manage through a crisis, right? Mm-hmm. Because crises happen.
Yeah.
They happen to me.
Mm-hmm.
I've been dealing with a couple of things this week, both personally and professionally, that, have kind of thrown me for a little bit of a loop.
Mm-hmm.
Some kind of painful things. And so, I was really thinking about, how do I best navigate through this? And I thought, this might be a good opportunity to talk about it on the podcast because, I don't know. I think a lot of times people feel in a crisis, they have to be strong and they have to be the rock, or they have to push away the sad feelings, or they have to not feel them because it's so painful.
Yeah.
And so I really kind of wanted to address that because I don't think those things are necessarily true.
Well, and I think addressing kind of the situation, in the most broad sense, is going to be good because you and I have actually dealt with this same generalized situation.
Yeah.
And the way I dealt with it and the way you're dealing with it is vastly different. So I think it's a really good idea for good idea, bad idea type of compare and contrast.
Yeah.
If you want to just give the broadest brushstroke of kind of what your week looked like this week.
Okay, so this week I've had a couple of things happen. A client passed. That is an incredibly difficult thing that I've been dealing with. And some other more personal things that were kind of surprising to find out had been going on. And yeah, it's been really difficult for me to deal with that. And I was thinking about that, after I found out, and I was I just have to be strong. And I was and I thought about, well, do I have to be strong, or can I feel my feelings? Is this a safe place to feel my feelings? Where would that be appropriate? Because I was at work when I found out about it. So I think the way that I decided to deal with it was to just kind of initially label the emotions. I'm feeling shocked and disappointed and sad and all kinds of feelings all at once.
So
right?
You started to acknowledge.
Yeah. I didn't want to just push them aside and pretend I was okay, because I wasn't okay. It's a loss. It's painful. So I wanted to be really honest with myself about what am I feeling right now? Because it wasn't just sadness. It was a lot of things all at once. And, I suspect sudden losses like that, when you suddenly lose someone who you've known or has been important in your life, that you may feel sad and you may feel other things too.
And it's such a different process when you don't see it coming.
Yeah.
And I think no matter what type of situation, so many of us have experienced a significant loss that just like blindsided us.
Yeah. And I would imagine that other people have felt what I felt, which was just all this jumble of emotions all at once. And you're like, but I just talked to that person like yesterday, or I talked to them last week and everything was fine. So I think that shock of it makes it a little more difficult to deal with.
Yeah.
But I thought about, I really wanted to be skillful about how I dealt with it and kind of think about the best way to go about that for me. And it's not the best way to go about it for everybody, but it was the best way to go about it for me. So the first thing I did was kind of label it. And then I reached out for social support almost immediately. Like, I think I texted you. I was like, I just have to tell you that this happened. And that's all I want to say about it right now. And, you were really there for me. And I thought, in a way that I think you recognized that I didn't really want to talk about it, but you also kept asking me like multiple times, like, how are you doing? Because I kept kind of pushing it aside and saying something else. And you're like, no, I'm going to bring you back to this for a minute. Like, how are you doing? And that was what really made me stop and think like, okay, I need to think about how am I doing with this?
I think like, and yours is a professional situation, and for our listeners and stuff, loss happens in different roles. And I feel like there's this expectation, especially when we talk about boundaries and stuff, like, well, I need to respond in this way. Like, perhaps like I need to respond professionally. Like when I went through a very similar situation with losing a client a few years ago, and my initial response for like a month was super clinical and detached, and that was because I felt like that was how I should have responded.
Like you were in a box of like, I'm professional, I need a professional response.
And I just, like, having gone through that, it's this, and we're all people.
Right.
Like, you cannot take that human piece out of it. So, yeah, just, I think taking away any expectations of how you should feel in a moment is going to go pretty far.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to what we talk about of like, and that's okay, right? Like, I'm sad about this and that's okay. I'm mad about this and that's okay. I'm disappointed and that's okay. Like, that human, like, you're entitled to your feelings and you feel how you feel and that's okay, right? Not like, I am a therapist, I am a coach, I act in this way when X happens.
Right.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of authenticity to that, right? And kind of that journey to figure out, well, what is my authentic reaction versus what is my professional reaction? Yeah.
And that, I can almost guarantee you, like, if you don't give space to that, like, in the moment, it'll come up eventually. Like, Tammy's heard this story so many times of, with this specific client, like, I just went on about my life and did my thing, and then 3 months later, I swear to God, it was 3 months later, and I was on a plane heading off for winter vacation, and I just broke down crying.
Yeah.
And my husband asked, like, what's wrong? And I just said something that was just completely, like, out of the blue. He had no idea what I meant. It was somewhat cryptic because he doesn't know the situation, all of these things.
Right.
And 3 months later, you know? So, like...
stuffing down those feelings has a way of coming out when you don't expect.
Yeah, totally. So... I don't know, just taking away that judgment. And I've seen so many people, not to like sidetrack and stuff, but lately I've seen so many people online like judging themselves for how they feel.
Yeah.
And that's like, it's the one thing where I'm just like, no, like your feelings are valid. Like you are valid as like wherever you are in that moment. I don't care what the hell you're feeling. Stop putting pressure on yourself to feel a different way.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, a lot of the work of therapy and a lot of the work of coaching, I think you can attest to this, is like helping people accept their feelings, positive or negative, more often negative, and helping them see like there's validity to that, and helping them experience that in a way that they recognize that they can get through it. Right. So like that's kind of a little bit like what I wanted to touch on today, this topic of like tolerating your feelings when you're in crisis, or maybe you're not in crisis, but a crisis has happened to you. If that makes sense, that's different. It is different in my mind.
Well, and it does, because I mean, like, I've been in an emotional crisis outside of nothing catastrophic is actually happening.
Right.
You know, so I think that distinction can be pretty clear. Like, if you feel like the world's crumbling versus like something externally making you feel like the world is crumbling.
Yeah.
I had something else I was going to say, but I can't remember.
It's okay. We'll just get back to it.
Yeah.
It's one of those days. It's going to be one of those topics, one of those times.
I think one thing I was going to say was when something huge happens, like, everything else that happens for a while, and I don't know like the research behind it or the stats or any like of the real science, but everything else that happens just is amplified to where like something catastrophic happens and then your kid's late to school. That's going to feel 10 times worse than if you were just dealing with like having your kid be late to school one day.
Well, I think if you think about it like an emotional bucket, right?
Yes.
Like, if you only have so much, I think we've even talked about this on the podcast before. Your bucket can only hold so much.
Yeah.
So when you have a big thing that fills the bucket and it's almost to the top, then the littlest thing spills it.
Yeah.
So like your kid being late to school, or your partner saying something that maybe is like an offhanded comment, or they didn't really mean anything, and you just kind of snap at them and you just kind of have this really intense emotional reaction that you didn't expect or seems kind of out of the blue. Just recognize that that's like your emotional bucket just being full.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really good point. I think that's like the science behind it is we only have so much to give, right? We are not unending like empathic machines, right? So we have our limits. Everyone has limits. So what do you do to help you kind of not hit those limits so much, right? And then I kind of started thinking in a more kind of theoretical or philosophical way about this idea of distress tolerance, which is something that I teach to clients all the time. And what struck me most in this time as I was thinking about it, I was driving and I had a long drive ahead of me, so lots of time to think.
Yeah.
As this idea of tolerance, right? Because when crises happen, you can't get rid of them. You can't avoid them. And the feelings just, they come, right?
Yeah.
So tolerance is about making it through it.
Right.
It's not about shutting off the feelings. It's about feeling the feelings and moving through that distress in a way that you can handle. So it isn't getting rid of it.
Right.
It isn't pretending it isn't happening. It isn't stuffing it down and being the strong one.
Right.
It's about dealing, basically. Like it's ways to deal. And for some reason that really struck me, because a lot of clients have told me like, I just don't want to feel these feelings. And the truth is you feel the feelings and you'll be okay.
Yeah.
And you'll make it. And you'll come out the other side of it. But in that moment, it doesn't feel that way.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, if we're talking like energy and where you're putting your energy and stuff, like if you're trying to be like the quote unquote like strong one, and for the longest time, I would always say like, I'm not a crier, and I would take pride in like, oh, I don't cry and all these things, right? But like when you're feeling the feelings and wanting to do those things, like you're letting your energy flow and kind of like wash out, to sound a little bit woo right now, like, but you're letting that process actually happen. And like in terms of crying and stuff, it's feeling like energy so strongly that you're causing a physical reaction. Right. And like in one hand, like how cool is that to be able to be like so like energetically like, you know, powerful that you cause like physical changes.
Yeah.
So like feeling the stuff is really helping the energy like move through, and to help you go through kind of like that tolerance phase that Tammy was talking about of getting to the other side versus being stuck in it. Because when you try to be strong and when you try to shut stuff down, then you're really shutting down that energy and you're putting a stopper in what's going on. And then we're dealing with this whole like arrested emotional state and stuff like that. And the next thing you know, you find yourself crying on a flight to Reno.
Right.
And no one wants to be crying on a flight to Reno.
I know. It just sounds like such a fun thing to be doing in the moment, you know? But crying is related to hormones and like mechanisms and chemical reactions in your brain. And so part of the reason is that oftentimes people experience relief when they cry is because of that.
Right.
And that's why sometimes we can cry in response to stress. If you think stress is kind of modulated, that's not the right word, but it's kind of turned on and off,
right?
Like through heightened. Yes, thank you. With hormones. So you're talking about neurotransmitters, like occurring in both those situations. And so there is some real science behind it.
See, our whole thing that we've been saying from the get-go, the woo with the science to back it up.
Yes.
I have won podcast land. We have won podcast land.
Yes. We win. So, I mean, it's okay to cry. I know I'm like you. I take pride in being a strong person and not crying. And I also, sometimes though, I try to take another perspective and think about, is it really strong not to cry? Or is it strong to cry and feel your feelings and think, you know what? I made it through that. And that was an incredibly difficult situation. And, you know, I felt that and I'm okay.
So recently, I've kind of been reevaluating. I don't even know how to say this, but I've been thinking about my response to things.
Oh, yeah.
And the whole like, well, I don't cry at sad movies and all of these things. And then I read something about someone crying at art. And I'm like, I've never cried at art. And then I had this moment where I was like, you know, I think I want to be that person that can feel things so strongly and see like so much, like imagine experiencing stuff so fully that you're moved to that. And I think like recently I've kind of formulated like, I don't want to call it a goal or something, but like a new appreciation and openness to being receptive to those emotions.
Yeah. I mean, kind of societal messages around it are kind of like, the person's just overcome. They're not in control.
I was going to say lose control.
Yeah, they've lost control. And yet, it doesn't have to mean a losing of control. It means, no, I'm strong enough to say and label, like, these are the emotions that I'm feeling, and I'm going to feel them in an authentic way.
Yeah.
For me. And that doesn't mean you have to cry. It also doesn't mean you don't have to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I think I just realized, like, I want to be more open to the powerfulness of stuff, because along with the whole like taking pride in like I don't cry, I've also taken pride in like my stoic nature, and I'm like, I don't know if that's benefiting me like as much as it used to, because we can talk about like what serves us throughout our life, right? And with my past and stuff, like being stoic was good.
Right. There was something about it that helped you survive.
Yeah. And now it's like, I don't think that I need that element in my life anymore. So how do I kind of transition and what do I fill it with? It's a really random side note, but...
Well, it kind of goes along with what, like, oh, I'm having this philosophical idea of what tolerance really means.
Yeah. Well, and how it looks.
Yeah. I like that, because I think there's a real authenticity to being like, I have powerful feelings and I feel them. There's a raw vulnerability to it that if you really think about it, people don't like to be vulnerable. It feels really uncomfortable. So people who can be in their own skin and be comfortable doing that, that's really powerful.
I was going to say, there's also like, it's a dichotomy, right? Or didactic. I'm using one of these words wrong.
It's okay.
I'm using something wrong. But like, there's vulnerability and there's strength.
Oh, yeah. It's a paradox.
Yes. That. Neither of the other words.
It's a dialectic too.
That one.
You're welcome. basically a paradox,
Yeah.
right? It's how this and this, and you and I live in the world of and.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's powerful and strength and all the things that you said, right? It's both. And when you really start to think about dialectics, I don't know if we've really talked about this. It's how two opposing things can both be true at the same time. So I'm sad and mad. I'm
smad.
I'm smad. It's weak and it's strong. And they exist side by side in this amazing world of and.
Right.
Which I love. And it also, the other thing I like about it is it admits that we don't all feel one way all the time.
Right.
So it's not black and white. So it connects with that idea too. And so when you start to look around and kind of, oh, yeah, that's a dialectic and that's a dialectic and they're all over the place.
Yeah.
I mean, paradox is kind of another way to think about it, but I think dialectic is a little bit more of an accurate way of looking at it because it's not, they're both true.
Yeah. Whereas a paradox is more like, I don't know, it feels like questionable and mysterious, and there's like a bit of an unknown. Whereas with a dialectic, you're dealing with like facts that are both true that like aren't seemingly true.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And they exist in the same space, which seems like that couldn't be true, and yet it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess we're a little bit tangential this week, but it all relates to each other. I mean, it all kind of comes back around.
Well, and I think like when life is completely kicking you in the face and stuff, you're going to be living in heightened dialectics because you're going to be feeling of the feelings of like whatever happened, or maybe nothing happened and you're living in your own like personal crisis, like whatever. And like, I lost my train of thought. Living in your world of crisis, and also dealing with with your response. Yeah. So like if you're not able to really reach a place of my feelings are okay, there's likely going to be a lot of like, I am really worn out and I need to be doing these things. You know, a lot, like so much more heightened push and pull.
Yes. It's going to feel bigger and more uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hey guys, Des here, popping in with a quick message. Have you been feeling really fucking stressed and not able to focus on the things you've got to do? I get it, we've all been there. That's why I made a totally free video training with 3 quick and easy tricks to chill out and be present so you can get shit done. So go to DesireeW.com and click on Slay Your Stress to get the training, because you've got better things to do than be stressed.
And so, you know, if you're having trouble identifying your feelings, like what I like to do is get out, and I don't do this all the time by any means. Like full disclosure, I teach skills. I don't use them all the time. That is an impossibility that we all strive for. Anyway, but I've been focused on using them this week. And so sometimes if I have trouble identifying emotions, because what are the ones we're taught to identify? Oh, I'm super frustrated, frustrated. And that's as far as you get. But usually there's something else there. It's just that that's the word we're taught. The acceptable word is that we're frustrated. So you can get out a list of emotions. They have them online. They have them all over the place. And be like, okay, how am I feeling? And you look for the word that kind of captures it. Like, yeah, you can say angry, but there's all kinds of nuanced words for angry, right?
You can also just go to thesaurus.com.
Yes.
Like, I'll be texting Tammy. I'll be like, I'm really pissed that does not accurately describe it. Hold on.
I know.
I don't go for the list of emotions because I'm not a therapist and don't think to access those tools. I just go to thesaurus.com and I'm like, mad. And then I just start scrolling.
Either way works. Whatever way works. But the idea is to kind of find the word that accurately describes the feelings that you're feeling, the thoughts you're having, the feelings in your body, the emotions that you're experiencing, and to put a label to that. Because sometimes even doing that, you're like, oh, that is how I'm feeling right now.
So much relief in being able to pinpoint what it is, like to the point where our first year in grad school, we're taught to simply name emotions.
Yeah.
And to practice like talking with clients, like naming emotions, and then the client being like, no, not that. And just like keeping us on our toes, like trying to find the emotion word, right? But it's so relieving. And if you're not able to find something, then that's also like a cue for, well, is it a couple things, like broaden your scope, broaden your search.
Start big.
Like
go to nuance, right? Like anger is a lot easier to identify than like rage or, you know, I'm totally blanking on other words for anger right now, but anger is more of a category. And then there's like words underneath it. So sometimes you can go broad with the category.
Yeah. Like sad would be like heartbroken, disappointed.
Exactly. So you kind of get the idea. So anger could be like, I feel antagonistic. I'm furious. I'm exasperated.
Yes.
I'm indignant. I'm irritated. Right? So all of those fall under the category of anger.
Yeah.
And, you know, start big. Yeah. Sometimes people get so disconnected from their feelings that sometimes frustrated is as far as they can go. And so then you want to encourage a little bit further. So you can start with those big, broad categories. Okay, I'm not frustrated. I'm angry. I'm not frustrated. I'm disappointed. I'm not frustrated. I'm pissed. Yeah. Like just to increase your vocabulary of words, right? And I've had clients be like, I don't need English lessons. And I get that. And it's not about giving English lessons. It's about giving you more words to accurately say how you're feeling.
Well, words are our most basic tool.
Right.
You know, and if you can't accurately communicate where you are and where you're standing, you're not going to get exactly the type of support that you need.
Right.
Because I'm angry is completely different than I'm indignant that person copied my work.
Yeah.
You know?
Or I'm irritated is much different than I'm furious.
Yeah.
Yeah. And those two things, so like if Des told me like I'm really irritated, I'd be like, okay, what do you know, like it's not that I wouldn't take it seriously, but I understand it's not that heightened, it's not that big a deal. But if you say I'm furious, I'm all about like, well, what happened? What's going on? Let's talk about it. Right? So people will respond to you differently.
Yeah.
And the other reason that it's important to identify the right emotion is sometimes I like to talk about anger. Anger is a little bit of a strange emotion because there's emotions underneath it. We kind of think of it as a secondary emotion. So like if you think about you're really sad, but you act out with anger, well, think about why that might be problematic. What do you need when you're sad? You need social support.
You need care and compassion.
Well, what does anger do?
It completely pushes people away. So I'm totally a person that shows depression in anger.
Okay.
So like if I'm feeling depressed and stuff, I get really short with my husband.
Yeah.
Which is not like what needs to happen.
Yeah, like you need support and you need the energy coming towards you. Yeah. And yet the energy you're putting out is saying, stay away, don't cross my boundaries, right? And so anger is a little bit like that because you could be scared, right? You can be scared and act out in anger. That's another good example. When you're scared, you need comfort. You need someone to ground you. You need to know that you're okay and you're safe. And yet anger says, don't come near me. I don't need you. Get away.
Right.
Right. So anger is kind of one of those emotions that I like to be like, well, what's beneath it? And kind of tease that apart.
How would you suggest someone know or have an idea that they need to go a little deeper in terms of naming an emotion?
Well, I mean, often if you name the emotion and you're just like, yeah, like a really meh, like a bleh kind of feeling, it's probably not exactly right. You probably need to look a little bit more. Not even like that's wrong. It's just like, I think we can do a little better. Be a little more accurate.
Yeah.
So that might be that would be a good indication that you're not really there in terms of accuracy. And then for distress tolerance, I just want to touch on it a little bit, kind of bring it back to where we were at. So a lot of distress tolerance is about mindfulness, about breathing, about kind of reducing your emotional response, reducing your It's about reducing your physical response to be able to tolerate your emotional response a little bit more.
Well, it sounds like it starts with awareness and mindfulness. Like you said, your physical, but also like, and like at the core, the stuff that comes up like emotionally first.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
it's both. Like it's being aware of both of like what your mind is saying and how your body's responding.
Yes, exactly. So, sometimes distraction or ways to self-soothe. The number one, is that even a real thing? The number one skill that I really like to teach is, and that's okay. A recognition that it doesn't, not okay in the sense that it's good, that you agree with it or anything like that.
Right.
It's just like, that's the way it is. I recognize that I can't change it. And so I'm going to stop fighting reality. That's the idea of that.
Yeah.
Right. And then finding ways to self-soothe, things that help me. Now, music, most people say music, and I have one little asterisk to that, is music can move you towards an emotion and away from one.
Right.
So if you're feeling like deeply depressed, don't listen to music that draws you towards that.
Don't put on Snow Patrol.
No, don't do that. Put on something that draws you away from it, that makes it a little easier to tolerate and kind of improves that mood, makes it a little easier.
So I would toss in a caveat for that.
Okay.
I would say that like music can be a huge facilitator of feeling the feelings.
Yeah.
So if you are experiencing some depression and maybe you have like the awareness that like I need to feel this, or like the desire to kind of process stuff, like if you're in a state to process shit.
Yes.
Then I would say, and things that like one thing that I do sometimes is I'll give myself, I'm not even joking, 5 Snow Patrol songs.
Okay. So you said
no more, no less.
But there's boundaries around it.
Like I don't just like lock myself in a room and listen to Snow Patrol for 12 hours a day.
So what I'm hearing, if I'm understanding you correctly, is that you feel like drawing towards the emotion, like depression, is okay. And you also are skillful in the sense that you put boundaries around it and say, this is the length of time I'm going to feel those feelings.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to turn away from them and do something else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's skillful too. And I agree. I think that's a great idea. Yeah. I like that you mentioned that because it's not black or white, right? I don't want anyone to get the idea that like, oh, if I'm depressed, I should run away from that. That's not the case. The thing we also know about depression is the thing that improves it is doing things you enjoy.
Right.
And social support is a big part of that. So it's not avoidance.
Right.
And sometimes we need distraction in the moment.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're overwhelmed and it's too much. And if that's the case, no Snow Patrol that day, maybe another day. And maybe you put on Taylor Swift. That might be a time for that.
Yeah. Well, anyone that's known me when I've dealt with like death, like in my family and stuff, can tell you I immediately become like the biggest comic.
Okay.
Like it's so inappropriate, but because like absurdly inappropriate. But I go straight to that distraction.
Okay.
And I mean, I was going to be a therapist and I am a life coach. Like I'm very much in tune to other people's feelings. Yeah. So when I'm like super surrounded and dealing with like all that shit, I'm just like, nope.
Yeah, it's like too much for you. Now, I would challenge you a little bit to say, do that in the moment if it becomes a chronic like I'm not saying that feeling your feelings means falling apart and being a puddle of goo on the floor. Right. And there's a time and a place. Yeah. If you're at work, you may want to distract yourself in that time, right? You may be like, I'm just going to be a jokester because this is not the time. And then when you get home, you feel your feelings. Exactly. You give yourself that opportunity. Yeah. Right? So there's time and place and judgment involved. Absolutely. And I would say, are you trying to protect people from their sad feelings? We'll probably cut all this. But
I mean, I am fine with it.
So if you're a jokester constantly,
Mhm.
is it just that like you can't deal with the sadness? Is it too much for you? I'm just curious about what that is.
It's totally just been like the shock. So like the first 24 hours.
Okay.
Or, you know, just like in the situation, and then I go take space like in a car ride, or like something disconnects from like whatever the situation is, and then like within a few hours I'm like pile of goo.
Okay.
But like my immediate like shock response, because you know how people get like shell shocked,
Yeah.
like that's my family death shell shock.
Okay. So
Yeah.
it's almost like your traumatic response.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not good or bad, right? It just is.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes too, I was curious, the questions that I asked you, just so people know my line of thought, is that sometimes, even as therapists, when people are feeling uncomfortable feelings, it's uncomfortable to watch.
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable to be there and witness. And so we kind of try to save people from those feelings when what they really need most is to feel them.
Yeah.
If someone has died, if you have lost somebody, sadness goes with that. Grieving goes with that.
Yeah.
And so, like, you wouldn't, like, nobody can be happy, rainbows and sunshine all the time. We would think that person was mad.
Yeah.
That they were just out of their mind. So, you know, those negative emotions go with negative events for a reason.
Yeah.
And so we want to be careful not to try and protect people from that situation. That's just where I was. Those are some of my thoughts.
But I think like all of this is to say that whatever your response is, like knowing how you respond is going to take you so far in managing whatever the next event like that is.
Absolutely.
You know, like I know my patterns and I can watch them if I need to. I can like lean into them if I like, you know, it all depends on what the situation is, but the awareness and not putting judgment on it. Like, I'm fine with how I respond in those moments because it serves me. And like, it's not my job to deal with other people's shit in those moments.
Right.
You know, so I'm going to own how I respond in those extreme times.
Right. And that's what you know about yourself. So you can be like, okay, this is where I'm at in the process. Like, I know that this feeling is going to come in the next however X amount of time.
Well, and mental health, right? Like, so if we think about it in terms of physical health, like mental health and physical health, like parallel and mirror each other in so many different ways. So like if you know you have a trick knee and it normally like is fine a couple days later, but then it's been 3 weeks and it's still weird, it's time to go see a doctor.
Yes.
Whereas, you know, well, this is how I normally respond in crisis. And when life just like throws all of the shit at me and it's been a few weeks and I'm not going through the cycles and patterns that I normally go through, it may be time to see someone.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. I was thinking about like moving or other big life changes, like when I changed jobs. I always start with this idea that this is just not going to work. I just need to go back to where I was. And this is just a process that I go through every time. That's just my process. So if you know your process, then you can say, okay, so this is where I'm at in the process. I know this is the time when I want to go back and try and move backwards. And so, okay, that's where I'm at. So how am I going to continue to take care of myself and push forward?
Right.
So it's a little bit of a different situation, but it's the same idea as kind of knowing how you move through situations.
And it keeps you from making drastic changes. Like when life kicks you in the face and you're feeling really depressed, it keeps you from making really drastic decisions with moving in a new job and stuff. Well, I really liked where I was before. It keeps you from looking for another job or trying to go back.
Right.
You know, it keeps you from
on the path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's why, like, not even journaling, but having some sort of record around kind of those times and noting it. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not a journaler myself. I don't really like it. I know people that love it. So I feel like it's like one of those love-hate things, like cilantro.
Right.
You either You either love it or you hate it. There's kind of no in between. And so I'm not much of a journaler, although I've done a lot of self-work around what is my process when things change? What is my process when I'm in crisis? And so I can identify those things. And then it helps me to kind of move through that. Yeah. Yeah. I know you like to journal.
I don't journal to like emote.
Yeah.
I take notes and I do like gratitude lists or to like shift, but I'm not like dear diary. Today so and so kissed me.
Today was a great day.
Okay. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No, you can. If that's your process, that's your process. We want to be non-judgmental.
Yeah.
And that's something I would say we all strive for and never totally achieve. And that was an example of us not having totally achieved non-judgmentalness.
Exactly.
Okay. So I hope this has been helpful for folks. We've been kind of rambling on different things, but it's,
there's a lot of good stuff.
Yeah. I agree. So there you have it.
Yep. All right. Thanks so much for tuning in. Let us know what you think. And we'll talk to you next time.
Take care, friends.
That wraps up this episode of the Sugar and Spikes podcast. Thanks so much for listening. We'd also like to thank Forget the Whale for use of their song, Move Along, as our theme music. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe, share, and let the whole world know how good this shit is by leaving a review. It would mean so much. Also, don't forget to get your free stress layer training by going to DesireeW.com and clicking on Slay Your Stress. You'll also find a link to that in the show notes below. Till next time. And remember to stay unavailable for fuckery.